Welcome to the deep dive. You send us your sources, and we become your guides, digging into them to pull out the key bits. Think of us as your shortcut to getting really informed.
Exactly. And this time, wow, you've given us quite the collection. We've got stuff from a parish council website, a pub's history page,
Right.
Wikipedia, naturally, news sites, a YouTube transcript, even an Amazon book description.
Right.
It's a real mix of angles on, well, one of Britain's most famous crimes.
And that is, of course, the Great Train Robbery of 1963. So our mission for this deep dive is to get to grips with what actually happened, who was involved, and, the legacy of this incredibly audacious crime, using all these different takes you provided.
Sounds good. It's quite a story to piece together from all these fragments.
It really is. Okay, let's dive in. Where and when did this all kick off?
So we're talking the early hours, August 8th, 1963. The location was near Bridego Railway Bridge in Buckinghamshire, not far from Mentmore.
And the target? A train, obviously, but...
A Royal Mail train, yeah.
Yeah.
It was heading south from Glasgow to London Euston.
Right, and this wasn't just carrying letters and postcards, was it? I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of money involved? The initial figures were big, but the reality was something else entirely.
Oh, absolutely. Initial reports might have said £300,000, but the actual haul was over 2.6 million.
2.6 million in 1963. What's that today?
Well, conversions are tricky, but you're looking at somewhere around 69 million pounds in today's money, maybe even more depending how you calculate it. A huge sum.
69 million. Wow. Why was that train carrying so much? Was that normal?
Not entirely. It was a bit of a perfect storm, really. It was just after a bank holiday weekend in Scotland, so there was a backlog of post and, crucially, old banknotes being taken out of circulation.
Ah, okay.
And on top of that, apparently a shipment of diamonds heading for Hatton Garden in London.
Diamonds, too. So a convergence, as you say. And wasn't there something about the train carriages themselves? Like a bit of luck for the robbers?
There was, yeah. The usual high-value package carriages, the HVP coaches, have been recently upgraded. Better security, bars, alarms, stronger bolts.
Right, makes sense.
But purely by chance, those specific upgraded coaches were out of service that night. The ones they used were the older, much less secure type.
Incredible luck for them. Okay, so they've got this target, this vulnerable train. How did they actually stop it? It wasn't like, lassos and horses.
No, much more. Technical in a lo-fi way. They messed with the signals near Bridego Bridge. Basically, they covered the green light, then used a simple glove to cover the red light on one signal, and rigged up a 6-volt battery to power the next signal's red light.
So the driver sees a red light further up than expected and stops in just the right place.
Exactly. Stopped right where they wanted him. It was a known trick, apparently. Something they might have picked up from another gang.
Clever. And they cut the phone lines too, didn't they? To isolate the train.
Yep. Cut the lines in the area so the crew couldn't easily radio for help or use the trackside phones. Standard procedure for this kind of thing, I suppose.
Right. Now, Bruce Reynolds is often named as the leader, the mastermind. How big was the actual gang that carried out the robbery?
Around 15 men, all hooded. Reynolds was certainly the key planner.
Well,
But you also had guys like Gordon Goody, Buster Edwards, Charlie Wilson, important figures in the group.
and some others who were maybe less well-known or only known by nicknames.
That's right, yeah. Some remained pretty shadowy figures, at least initially.
Now, it's often portrayed quite romantically, almost. But it wasn't bloodless, was it? The train driver.
No, absolutely not. That's a really crucial point. When the train stopped, the fireman, David Whitby, went to use a trackside phone, found the lines dead, and was grabbed.
Okay.
But the driver, Jack Mills, he apparently put up a bit of a fight when they entered the cab, and he was hit over the head with a metal bar, a kosh, suffered quite serious head injuries.
A grim reminder that this was violent crime, not just some cheeky caper.
Definitely.
So, train stopped, crew dealt with.
Yeah.
How did they get to the money? Did they just rob the whole train?
No, they were more focused. They uncoupled the engine and the 2 HVP carriages from the rest of the train.
Leaving the other postal workers behind.
Yeah, initially unaware of the full extent of what was happening up front, but then they hit a snag.
Oh, what was that?
The plan involved bringing a replacement driver to move the engine and coaches to a better spot for unloading. Ronnie Biggs brought this guy along, known as Peter, or maybe Stan Agate.
Right, I read he was supposed to be some kind of train enthusiast.
Yeah, he'd apparently bluffed his way into learning something about trains, pretending to be a spotter, but
Faced with the real thing.
he couldn't operate the controls of the big diesel-electric locomotive, completely froze or just didn't know how. Bit of a crucial failure in the plan.
So what did they do?
They had to go back and get Jack Mills, the driver they'd just attacked.
No. The injured driver.
Yep. Forced him, presumably under threat, to drive the engine and the two coaches about a mile further down the track to Bradego Bridge itself.
God, the poor guy. Okay, so they finally get the relevant carriages to the bridge. Then what?
At the bridge, more of the gang were waiting. They smashed a window on one of the HVP carriages. That alerted the guards inside.
And they tried to resist.
Tried to barricade the door with mailbags, yeah. But one of the robbers used a crowbar, forced his way in, and overpowered them.
And then the main event. Getting the cash off the train. How did they move so much money so fast?
It was actually pretty organized at this point. They formed a human chain, basically, down a steep embankment from the bridge to where their getaway vehicles were waiting below.
Like Jane Gang, but for loading loot.
Pretty much. They passed 120 sacks of money down this chain. It only took about 15 to 20 minutes, apparently.
That's incredibly quick for that amount of cash. So efficient.
In that moment, yes. Very efficient.
And when they left, did they just disappear?
They told the remaining train staff, including Mills and Whitby, to stay put for half an hour before calling the police. Gave them a crucial head start.
Smart. Buy some time.
And they used decoy vehicles, too. Several Land Rovers, all with the same number plates, driving off in different directions to try and confuse any immediate chase.
That suggests quite detailed planning for the getaway, too, then, despite the driver hiccup.
Yes, although, as we'll see, the post-getaway planning wasn't quite so meticulous.
Right. So where did they actually go? The hideout.
They headed to Leatherslade Farm. It's near Oakley, also in Buckinghamshire. A fairly remote farmhouse.
Who organized that?
That was Brian Field, a solicitor's clerk who was connected to the gang. He arranged the purchase.
Okay, so they're at the farm, millions of pounds in sacks. What happens next? Counting time.
Exactly. Charlie Wilson was apparently in charge of counting and divvying it up. The expectation was about 150,000 pounds per main gang member.
A fortune back then.
Yeah.
What about the replacement driver? The one who couldn't drive?
Him. Apparently he got absolutely nothing, despite being promised a share.
Huh. Probably fair enough, given his performance. And is this where the famous Monopoly story comes in?
It is. One of the most iconic, almost surreal details. They supposedly passed the time at the farm playing Monopoly.
Using the stolen money.
Using the actual stolen banknotes. You just couldn't make it up, could you?
You really couldn't. Okay, so the robbery, despite the driver issue and the violence, basically worked. But the aftermath, the hideout, that seems to be where the mistakes really started creeping in.
Definitely. The clock was ticking from the moment they told the train crew to wait half an hour.
So when did the alarm finally get raised?
Well, eventually, a guard further back on the stationary part of the train got suspicious, went to investigate, found the front missing.
Right.
He then managed to get to the next station, Cheddington, on another train, and raised the alarm around 4:20 a.m.
And the police response must have been huge.
Massive. Initially, it was Buckinghamshire Police, led by Chief Superintendent Malcolm Futrell. They secured the scene, started gathering evidence.
But Scotland Yard got involved quickly.
Oh, yes. Given the scale, the Yard stepped in fast. You had Detective Chief Superintendent Ernie Millen, Detective Superintendent Gerald MacArthur leading the London end. And later, the famous Flying Squad detectives Tommy Butler and Frank Williams became heavily involved.
The Flying Squad.
Yeah.
Right. So, top detectives on the case. Did the robbers leave any immediate clues apart from the Monopoly board later?
That instruction to wait half an hour was actually a big clue.
How so?
It strongly suggested the hideout had to be within about 30 miles, roughly half an hour's drive. That really helped narrow the search area for the police.
Smart deduction. And how did they actually pinpoint Leatherslade Farm? That was the big break, wasn't it?
It was huge, and it came down to a really quite basic mistake. Brian Field, the guy who bought the farm.
The solicitor's clerk.
Yeah. He used his real name for the purchase, or at least a name easily traceable back to him. A massive oversight.
Wow. After all that meticulous planning for the robbery itself.
I know. Once police traced the sale and found the farm, it was a gold mine. Fingerprints everywhere, especially on that Monopoly set.
The Monopoly set again. It just keeps coming back. Those prints must have led straight to arrests.
Pretty quickly, yes. The forensic work at the farm was crucial. Combined with a huge investigation, thousands of statements, reports, index cards being cross-referenced, they started rounding up most of the gang within the next year or so.
Most, but not all. There were some acquittals and escapes, weren't there?
That's right. John Daly was one. His fingerprints were on the Monopoly board. But his lawyer argued successfully that he'd played Monopoly with Bruce Reynolds earlier that year, so the prints didn't prove he was there during the robbery's aftermath. He was acquitted.
Clever lawyering. What about Reynolds himself? He wasn't caught straight away.
No, Reynolds managed to stay on the run until 1968. He was the last of the main gang members to be initially caught.
And others, like Charlie Wilson, Ronnie Biggs, they were caught but then got out.
Exactly. Both Wilson and Biggs made famous escapes from prison. Biggs particularly became the sort of folk anti-hero, living abroad for decades before eventually coming back to the UK in 2001. Wilson escaped too, but was recaptured after a few years.
So a largely successful investigation in terms of catching people, eventually.
Yeah.
But what about the money? The £2.6 million, did they get much of that back?
Very little, actually. That's one of the enduring mysteries. Less than £400,000 of the total haul was ever officially recovered.
Less than £400,000 out of £2.6 million. Where did it all go?
Well, some bits were found. They recovered Roger Corder's share when they caught him, about £141,000.
Right.
Brian Field's cut, supposedly around £100,900, was also located. They found £36,000 in Jimmy White's caravan. Roy James had about £12,000 on him.
Right.
And then there was that strange recovery of $47,245 from a telephone box in South London.
A phone box? How did that happen? Sounds like a movie plot.
It kind of does. Apparently it was part of a deal. Danny Pembroke, one of the robbers, he supposedly cut a deal with Detective Inspector Frank Williams. Pembroke was worried about being double-crossed, so he offered up the location of that stash in return for, well, leniency and maybe protection for his associates. Then an anonymous tip led the police right to it.
Interesting. Sounds like some murky dealings behind the scenes there. And even for the ones caught, didn't they face huge legal bills?
Oh yeah, massive costs. Around £30,000 each, according to some sources. That would have eaten significantly into any share they still had hidden away.
Definitely takes the shine off £150,000. What about the ones who stayed on the run longer, like Reynolds, Wilson, Edwards? Did they live the high life with their share?
Mostly no. By the time they were caught, or in Edwards' case surrendered, they'd spent most of it just living as fugitives, maybe trying to set up new lives, legal fees, perhaps some bad investments. It just evaporated.
So the dream of retiring rich on the proceeds didn't really pan out.
Not for most. Jimmy White supposedly had his share taken by others. It seems the money brought more trouble than long-term security.
And families. Did any of the relatives benefit? I read something about Tommy Wisby's share.
Yeah, his daughter Marilyn has spoken about it. Apparently, Wisby's father hid his share in their house. Some was found, but not all.
So the family used some.
It seems so. She mentioned her grandfather buying a house with some of it. But she also talked about the bitterness, her family having some benefit while her dad was in prison. It's complicated. No lasting fortune, just remnants.
Right, a complicated legacy there. What about the gang members who were never caught? Did they just vanish with the cash?
Well, the story suggests even they didn't hold on to it forever. The ones sometimes identified as Harry Smith, Bill Jennings, and Danny Pembroke, Frank Monroe, apparently claimed later they had nothing left.
And Pembroke did that deal with the phone box money anyway.
Exactly. And Ronnie Biggs, though he escaped, famously blew through his share pretty quickly, setting up his life on the run.
So even the ones who got away clean didn't necessarily stay rich. Was the third uncaptured robber ever identified?
Officially, no. Names like Billy Ambrose, a boxer, have been thrown around, but nothing confirmed. It remains one of the unsolved pieces.
And the useless replacement driver. Pops or Stanagate.
Never caught. And crucially, never paid his promised £20,000. Just sort of vanished from the story, having failed at his one job and getting nothing for it.
A pretty poor outcome for him. What about sentences for the ones who were convicted? They were famously harsh, weren't they?
Extremely harsh for the time. Sentences up to 30 years were handed down. Judge Edmund Davies wanted to make an example of them.
30 years. But did they serve all that?
Most didn't, no. Sentences were often reduced on appeal or they got parole eventually, but they still served significant stretches.
And life after prison. What became of them? Did they just fade away?
Some tried. A few moved abroad, often to Spain. Buster Edwards' story is quite tragic. Ran out of money in Mexico, came back, ended up selling flowers outside Waterloo Station.
I remember hearing about that.
And then sadly took his own life. Charlie Wilson was murdered in Spain, possibly a gangland hit. Ronnie Biggs, as we said, became the celebrity fugitive. Bruce Reynolds got into trouble again later with drugs, struggled financially. Bobby Welch was the last survivor, passing away only in late 2023.
It really doesn't sound like the robbery led to happy endings for almost anyone involved.
Not really, no. More often tragedy, further crime, or just obscurity.
Let's talk about the wider impact. The media attention was insane, wasn't it?
Absolutely phenomenal. The press went wild, and there was definitely a tendency in some quarters to paint them as glamorous rogues, these sort of gentleman villains.
Like modern Robin Hoods.
Some tried that angle, yeah.
Yeah.
But the judge at the trial, Judge Davies, completely shut that down, called it a sordid crime of violence inspired by vast greed, which, given what happened to Jack Mills, feels much closer to the mark.
And the impact on Mills and the other trained staff. That often gets overlooked in the more romantic versions.
Hugely overlooked, and it's crucial. Jack Mills never really recovered physically or mentally from the head injury. He suffered health problems until his death some years later.
And the fireman, David Whitby.
He was also deeply affected by the trauma, died relatively young from a heart attack. There's now a plaque at Crew Station commemorating their ordeal, which is important. It reminds us there were real victims.
Absolutely. A necessary counterpoint to the gangster glamour.
Uh-uh.
I also read the bridge itself, Bridego Bridge, got renamed.
It did, yeah. It became a bit of a macabre tourist spot, and locals felt it was insensitive. So after a campaign, it was renamed Mentmore Bridge in 2013.
A more neutral name. The cultural impact has been massive too, right? Films, music, books.
Oh, endless references. Your sources mention things like a quick line in the Beatles' Help, nods in Bond films like Thunderball, Agatha Christie used elements, loads of novels, songs by everyone from Mountains, the Sex Pistols to Alabama 3.
It really captured the imagination.
It did, and it spawned countless books, too. Books by the police who investigated, autobiographies by the robbers themselves giving their often self-serving accounts.
Right.
And then later historians trying to sift through it all and debunk the myths. You get so many different perspectives.
And finally, the local impact. Your sources mention Brill, the village near the farm, and also a pub in London.
Yeah, Brill got totally swamped by the media when Leatherslade Farm was found. Press helicopters overhead, reporters filling the local pubs trying to get quotes from residents.
Must have been chaos for a small village.
Apparently so. One resident mentioned the local policeman becoming a bit of a minor celebrity overnight. And then there's the Star Tavern in Belgravia, London.
The planning location?
According to the pub's own history, yes, it was a known hangout for that criminal element, and apparently a lot of the plotting for the robbery happened right there, under the nose of the landlord, Paddy Kennedy.
Amazing. From a posh London pub to a quiet country farm. Okay, let's try and pull this all together. What are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
For me, it's the huge contrast. You have this incredibly bold, quite meticulously planned crime,
Right.
followed by this almost farcically chaotic and careless aftermath at the farm. All that money stolen, yet so little of it brought any lasting benefit to the robbers.
And the image versus the reality.
Exactly. The romanticized gentleman-villain idea clashes so strongly with the violence inflicted on Jack Mills and the ultimately quite grim fates of most of the gang. The sources really show that messy reality.
So thinking about all these different pieces, the parish council view, the pub history, the crime reports, the personal accounts,
Yeah.
what aspect of it all really stands out? What does this story tell us about, I don't know, crime, fame, the human condition?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Why this crime still holds such fascination? Maybe it's the scale of the ambition. Or perhaps the sort of inevitable failure and downfall makes it a powerful narrative. It certainly seems to underline that old cliche.
Crime doesn't pay.
Well, it might pay incredibly well in the very short term, but the long-term consequences, the prison time, the paranoia, the way it seemed to derail their lives, it rarely seems worth it in the end.
Definitely food for thought. And if you want to explore more, you could always look up some of those biographies, watch the films, listen to the songs, or maybe even check out what Brill Parish Council is up to these days. You never know. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.